In the 7th century, the Sassanid Empire fell to the desert. For 200 years, its language nearly vanished from the world. The civilization underneath it went underground. A young historian in Tehran spent his life trying to understand how it survived. Then he decided his book was wrong. His name is Abdolhossein Zarrinkoob. He is 29 years old. He has spent the last decade of his life studying the 2 centuries after the Arab conquest of Iran, the period most Iranian historians had either romanticized into martyrdom or left politely alone. He published what he had learned 3 months ago. The book is selling. The reviews are glowing. He has decided the book is wrong. Not factually. The facts are correct. The sources are solid. What is wrong is him. He wrote the book as a young man who loved his country too much to see it clearly. Every page, he has come to understand, is tilted, not by any single error, but by the cumulative weight of a pride he couldn't detach from his own eyes. He looked at the fall of the Sassanid Empire and saw tragedy. The evidence had also shown corruption, exhaustion, a population with reasons to welcome the change. He had not wanted to see those reasons. Now he does. Over the next 6 years, he will rewrite the book from the beginning. The second edition will appear in 1957. In its preface, he will write the sentence that becomes the conscience of the series we are about to tell.
My covenant with the reader is not to contaminate the past with vanity and deception. My covenant is to seek the truth.
This is the story that book tells, not the summary of events, the story of specific people in specific rooms making specific decisions that ended a civilization and, slowly, painfully, across 200 years, produced a different one. It is also, because Zarrinkoob was writing in 1957 and looking at a country already uneasy with itself, a mirror. The patterns he found in the 7th century are not exotic, they are structural, they recur, which means if you are Iranian, this is the history your education either romanticized or suppressed, and the one underneath the country you live in today. If you are not Iranian, this is the history that shaped the modern Middle East, the logic of political Islam, and the wars being fought at this moment. Almost nobody in the West has ever told it to you straight. We are going to tell it straight, through the people who lived it. Before we can tell it straight, we need a myth, not for decoration, for accuracy, not from Zarrinkoob's book. He doesn't use it, from the older Iranian imagination that produced him. The Iranians have told this story to themselves for 1,000 years, and it explains, better than any historian can, how a civilization survives its own destruction. In Persian myth, the Simorgh is an ancient, vast, knowing bird who nests atop the tree of all seeds at the center of the world. She has lived so long that she has seen the world destroyed and remade 3 times. She carries the memory of cycles, of endings that are not final, and beginnings that are never entirely new. Centuries later, the Sufi poet Attar takes this myth and turns it inward. In the Conference of the Birds, written 500 years after the Arab conquest, in the Persian language that had survived its own attempted erasure, a gathering of birds realizes they have no king. They set out to find one, the Simorgh, the hidden sovereign at the center of the world, who will answer all their questions, who is the source of everything. The journey, they are told, will take them across 7 valleys. The first is longing, where desire strips them of comfort. The second is love, which burns away reason. The third is knowledge, where certainty collapses. Then detachment, then unity, then bewilderment, and finally poverty and annihilation. Each valley taking something essential, each one demanding they leave behind what they thought they were. Most do not survive. Some turn back. Some become lost in illusions along the way. Some simply disappear. By the end, only 30 birds remain. They reach the mountain where the Simorgh is said to live. They ask to see the one they have crossed everything to find. What they see is a mirror, 30 birds looking back. The name is not accidental. In Persian, Si means 30, and Morgh means bird. What they were seeking was never separate from them, but it was also not something they possessed at the beginning. It only came into being through the journey, through loss, through transformation. The Simorgh of ancient myth witnessed worlds destroyed and remade. Attar's Simorgh shows that the same destruction happens within a single life. The self that begins the journey cannot survive it intact. The phoenix burns and is reborn identical. The Simorgh is not the phoenix. The Simorgh is what 30 ordinary birds become after they have crossed 7 valleys and lost most of what they started with. Not restoration, not rebirth, becoming. Iran did not wait out 2 centuries of occupation and then return to being what it had been before. Over 2 centuries of silence, it changed. It absorbed Arabic into Persian. It absorbed Islam into its own older imagination. It lost, permanently, the Sassanid Empire and the Zoroastrian state and the court poetry of Khosrow's time. And it became, slowly, stubbornly, across generations, something that had not existed before the fire. A civilization that had crossed the valleys and found itself on the other side. This series lives inside that myth, not because myths are true, because this one is accurate. Back to the young man rewriting his book. Zarrinkoob pauses on an image in his preface that tells you what kind of historian he is going to be. He imagines the reader as someone who has come to his door at night. The reader is looking for something, not flattery, not pride, not confirmation of what they already believe. The reader is looking for the truth, as much of it as an honest man can offer. And Zarrinkoob writes with a humility that is almost disarming.
I make no claim to have reached the truth in this search. I make no claim to have fulfilled the duty of a rigorous historian. This is my wares as you see them, and their worth is less than their appearance.
He is a scholar who has just withdrawn his own book from the field and put a better version in its place. And he is still apologizing. His book opens with a splendor, not a fall. The Sassanid state at its height, when Roman emperors trembled at its gates, and Arabs came to the Persian court as supplicants. He began there, with what would be lost, to ask how it was lost. At his desk in Boroujerd, Iran, in the 1950s, son of a religious scholar, raised on Quran and Persian poetry in equal measure, later the most honored historian of his generation, he sits with his hands stained with ink. 2 manuscripts open in front of him, the 1951 edition and the 1957 one. He is crossing out whole sections. He is adding new ones. He is marking in the margins what he had missed. What he had missed, mostly, was the ugliness on his own side. The Persian nobility that adapted to the conquerors within a generation. The Zoroastrian clergy that had bled the country before the Arabs ever arrived. The peasants who did not mourn the Sassanid Empire because the Sassanid Empire had never been on their side to begin with. He had named the place where his bias lived. He wrote in 1957,
In those days, my soul was so full of passion and epic feeling that I held everything pure and true and divine to belong to Iran, and everything not from ancient Iran I held to be ugly, base, and false.
The book he is writing is not a lament for what Iran lost. It is an honest accounting of why Iran was losable. The questions his first edition had not answered, his critics had asked. Why had the Sassanid Empire fallen? How had desert nomads taken the destiny of one of the world's great civilizations? Why had Persian disappeared from the written record of 2 centuries that were anything but silent? The second edition would have to answer. That accounting is where we begin. Why silence? A critic asked Zarrinkoob this shortly after the first edition appeared. The 2 centuries after the Arab conquest were not silent. They were full of uprisings, philosophical debates, religious movements, poetry sung in defiance. Iranians fought, wrote, argued, conspired, and slowly transformed the culture that had conquered them. That is not silence. That is a civilization roaring underground. Zarrinkoob's answer was specific.
During those 2 centuries, the Persian language, the vessel of everything Iran had been, nearly vanished from the written record. The courts spoke Arabic. The government wrote in Arabic. The prayers were in Arabic. Any scholar who wanted to be heard by the powerful wrote in Arabic. Persian went underground, spoken by farmers and children and the stubborn and the dispossessed, present in songs and folk memory and in the names people whispered to newborns, but absent from the official life of a civilization. That is the silence the title names, not the silence of the dead, the silence of a living language forced to breathe through someone else's throat.
And the question Zarrinkoob asks, the question every episode of this series will sit with, is this.
How does a civilization survive the silencing of its own voice?
Zarrinkoob noticed something most historians of his generation missed. When the Sassanid Empire fell to the Arab armies in the 7th century, the Iranian people did not speak with one voice. Some welcomed the change. They had suffered too long under the old order to mourn it. Some fought. Some fought to the last man, and the chronicles record their names, and Zarrinkoob makes sure those names get through. Some collaborated. The Iranian nobility, those with the most to protect, adapted fastest to the new rulers, learned Arabic, found their place in the new administration, and in doing so, quietly abandoned the people they had once governed. Some went underground. They kept the language alive in songs and children's games and the private registers of grief. It is from these people, across 2 centuries, that the transformation would eventually come. But they did not know that. They were just trying to survive. The fractures that ran through Iranian society in 651 CE, when Ctesiphon fell, run through it still. They have simply changed their names. Zarrinkoob ended his preface with a sentence I have carried with me since I first read it. He wrote,
"The historian, from the very moment he chooses his subject, has already departed from the neutrality that truth-seeking demands. I make no claim to have been exempt from this, but perhaps the reader can forgive this much departure from the truth."
He was writing about himself, but he was also, I think, writing about Iran, a civilization that has spent 14 centuries arguing about what it is, Persian or Islamic, ancient or new, continuous or interrupted, cannot be neutral about its own history. The question is not whether the argument is passionate. The question is whether it is honest. That is the wager of this series. Next episode, we go back to the beginning.